and you're gonna put your body in so much pain, and
Mm,
you're gonna suck, and it's gonna hurt, and you have that fear. And I
mm,
remember even to this day when I'm training in winter training and I know it's gonna be hard, you have that fear within you. Am I gonna do this? Can I do this? But you chase the feeling after. You go, I'm scared now, but I know when I finish this session, I'm gonna be a stronger person.
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to the Share.care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own interest to help others. And today is my great honor and pleasure to have Sydney Contech on the show. Now, Sydney was born in Sierra Leone and he escaped to the United Kingdom at age 5 due to the Sierra Leonean War. Now, he has a psychology degree, and Sydney has a deep passion for youth advocacy. And even the smallest lesson taught by a teacher, a poet, celebrity, author, or others can grow and blossom to become a core attribute in the child's personality. Welcome, Sydney. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. Yeah.
That's good. And I'm going to leave this like it is for the start of this show, but then I'll turn around. But I'm just highlighting that Australia is on top of the world and where you are is the other side of the world. That's why you're upside down. Well,
Yes,
that means
yes. Uh, and I will warn you, I currently, because I can see my accent is very southern England, but I do live in northern England. So if you ever see my accent change mid conversation, it's because the Liverpudlian in me comes out.
fair enough. Fair enough. And I have been to the United Kingdom. It's a beautiful country. I very much enjoyed my time there. But do you want to start? Can we start this show by you jumping in the Wayback Machine? Now, you may remember this is a silver DeLorean that Doc Brown invented from Back to the Future. And when you hit 88 miles an hour, you could travel through time. But you look a bit young, so maybe you don't know it. But I'm going to take it.
I've heard of it. I've heard of it. Yeah.
I'm older than I look. But do you want to jump in that? Let's travel through time. Let's look
Okay.
at some incidences that happened in your life that shaped who you are, that led to you doing what you're doing now.
Well, sure. Let's do it. Let's jump in.
Okay, let's go. You're in the driver's seat. Put your foot to the floor. I'm holding on. I'm clutching the dash just in case. You never
Okay.
know. Seatbelts
Okay.
on, of course.
It's an eventful ride. I've had a lot happen to me. I've had
Very bumpy. Okay. Make sure we got good shocks in the car. I love this. All right. So take us back from when in a time when did it start? I mean, you obviously had a traumatic childhood escaping a war.
yeah.
That's pretty full on. So
Yes, I think if we start from the beginning, then it's something that's very. So I left when I was 5, so a lot of the memories I had was subconscious. So a
yeah.
lot of the things I feel and do is very based on the retrospective.
Right.
So a good example is I often say I carry stars on my back every day. So these stars represent the people that died for me to be alive. I was a very, very, very lucky person
Mm,
to be raised in a relatively middle class home
yeah.
in Sierra Leone. My mom worked for a charity. My dad was well enough. We had a house. We never really had to struggle. I went to a private primary school. So being born in a position of privilege during war meant I
Mm,
never really faced I faced hardship. There were moments where I could have died, and my mother, especially with the job she had, she was in danger a lot because of the rebels and what was happening. But I was never in the full gust of the danger. If there are many examples, if you look into the Sierra Leonean Civil War, people that had their arms cut off, people
Wow.
that were forced to be child soldiers, it was horrific.
Mm.
And even though I went through a lot and my family went through a lot, though like before I was 5, I nearly died multiple times. So I'm not gonna say I had it easy, but I had it a lot easier compared to other people. So for me, I walk around with these stars on my back. Because the people that didn't make it, I make it for them. I'm paving for I am their legacy and I'm
Mm.
also my own legacy. So I'm
Yeah.
never walking alone for me.
Wow. That sounds like a fairly big cross to carry. Is that?
Yes, earlier on in my life,
Mm.
it was a really, really big cross. I I had a coach. I did track and field, and I still do track and field now, who I had a conversation with him once, and he told me something, and it's something it resonates with me so much. He said, "How would they feel if they see you beating yourself up?" Because I would beat myself
Mm.
up for that cross, and I just heard him, and I was like, "Huh." And you know when that bombshell hits you, and you're like, "Oh, I can still use them to push me forward, but I'm not going to use them to beat myself up
Mm.
because it would be disingenuous to their memory. It
Yes.
would be insulting their memory,
Mm.
and I don't want their memory to be negative to me. I want
Yeah.
everything that I do and say to be a positive reflection of who what they were. I
Yeah.
don't know them. Some of them were my family members, some of them weren't. But for the hundreds of thousands of people that died, I cannot let that burden being a negative influence on me. I need to shine that light through me to them. So I do that in my poetry, in my books that I've published, in everything that I do generally.
Wow. Because what it sounds like from that, if I'm understanding correctly, is that, is it survivor syndrome where you feel, the burden because others didn't make it and you did?
Oh, 100%, 100%. And it's something I would say it's if you go through any war, it happens. And I think now will be the Ukraine war is the biggest example, but there's wars happening all around the world.
Mm.
When you survive a war, you will always have that survivor's guilt or survivor's syndrome.
Mm.
It's impossible to be born in a place of chaos and death and not look back at why am I alive.
Mm.
It's impossible to do so. So I think that survivor's syndrome, as you said it, comes from a place of looking back and reflecting on life and going, why am I alive? Because not a lot of people get to question that. It's a question that is it's it's a lot of people are privileged enough to not question their mortality. But when you're
Mm.
born in a war, you question your mortality, and that's where the survivor syndrome comes from.
Mm. Wow, it's pretty hard. I mean, yes, well, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that can relate to that in today's course because, as you said, there's a number of wars going on, and certainly, obviously, the Ukraine war is one that stands out right at the moment. But
Mhm.
certainly there's a number going on, and it does. There's the whole raft of other questions that brings up. But let's move forward in there. So, from that perspective, after you came to the UK, what was? I mean, you mentioned you had to go through that process of accepting that you survived. How did you go through that?
Also not the best, not the best. My family situation was a very interesting one. So I actually came in the country as a Jehovah's Witness, and that I never really had the process to filter my experiences until I left the Jehovah's Witness religion.
Okay.
Because I kind of went from being born into a war and having that bubble, that little trap, that little bubble, and
Mm.
then going into a religion I never really believed in. So it's another little bubble. And
Mm.
it's only when I left both bubbles, obviously one bubble I had no choice. You can say I had no choice with both bubbles because my parents' religion.
Mm.
When I left both bubbles and I was able to think for myself and I was able to process stuff myself, which was only when I was 17, so only 10 years, being a 27-year-old, it's it was only been 10 years that I've actually been able to say, okay, how am I processing things?
Mm-hmm.
Not just as a war survivor, but as someone who has had a lot of trauma from the age of 0 to 18.
Mm-hmm.
So it's only a recent thing for me that I'm processing. And I think for me as an author, and this is why I'm really proud to be an author and proud to be in youth advocacy,
Mm.
that's where I feel like a lot of the therapy comes through for me.
And that processing that you went through,
Hmm.
how did you do that? What did you do? Were you journaling? Were you taking some solitude time? How did you
Hmm.
actually make that work?
There's two parts. I think the first part would be the journaling.
Mm-hmm.
So that how I actually got into being an author and a poet was I journaled. I write 80% of my writing as a poet.
Mm-hmm.
90% is just for me. So I have 4 books of, I think I've written like 2,000 poems. And out of those 2,000, only 50 of them are published or in books.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wow.
the rest of them are just for me. The rest of
Yeah.
them is just for my own mental health. So I'm very picky with the pieces of myself that I give to the world as a poet.
Mm.
Because the rest of it is how am I healing? I write a poem to heal myself, and then I feel like if it's going to heal someone else, then I pass it on. So I feel like being a poet has very helped me a lot from the mental health side. The other side of it would be working in youth advocacy and having a psychology background. My father being a psychologist, my mum being a social worker, I am surrounded by a lot of ideals of how to process your emotions, how to have a healthy mental health.
Mm-hmm.
It's all around me from a degree level, from a family level. I have examples of what to do and what not to do to have good mental health. I still struggle, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but I've had these examples. So when I'm struggling and I'm working with young people, let's say I was working with a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
I would think, okay, I need to be the best model for them.
Mm.
So if I'm going to say to a teenager who is going through heartbreak or trauma, am I modeling that same thing that I'm going to tell them? And that for me is a major thing. 'Cause if it's kind of you don't want to be the hypocrite. So if I'm giving advice to, let's say, my future children, am I myself doing that advice?
Mm-hmm.
I must do that advice myself to then pass it on to someone else. So I think that is another way I've processed my emotions and my trauma. I give advice to myself and I follow it because I have a lot of young people which I've been privileged to have helped become adults, and I've had to mirror how I have to mirror the best in them. That means I have to be process my emotion, be good with my mental health, be conscious of my mental health. So I think those two, the fact that I'm a poet and the fact that I've had to mentor and build up other young people.
From that perspective, does that for you create a bunch of pressure that you have this whole role modeling aspect and be the best for them as well?
Hmm. What do you mean? Can you
Well,
expand on that, please?
you're talking about very strongly about how you need to be the right role model for them, how you
Yeah.
need to be your best. And you mentioned
Hmm.
best a lot. And I'm just
Hmm.
wondering from that perspective, does that create a pressure for you, a psychological pressure
Yeah.
to ensure that you are your best, or how do you manage that? Because when you look at it from that perspective, you go, I've got to be the best for them.
Yeah.
It's a heavy responsibility. If it, well, it could be perceived as a heavy responsibility, but
I, I would agree. It can be heavy, but I think that's where you have people around you
Mhm.
who lighten the load.
Right.
Because like I said, I carry these stars on my back, so I know I put on a lot of these heavy responsibilities I put on myself
Yeah.
because I have that expectation and I want to do great things for other people and myself and achieve great things. So that's why I'm very fortunate to have good people around me. And when I pick, I think that the best advice I'll give to any young person is find people who are going to be able to give you peace in your life and see the best in you. Even when you don't see the best in yourself, like when that pressure is getting really big,
Mm-hmm.
you don't see the best in yourself. But having someone like I always give my coach, I've had more people than my coach. I have many more people who've supported me, but my coach is the first one comes to my head right now. He's always been a mirror for me to reflect on myself and
Mm-hmm.
to do it safely. So
Mm.
I've had people who've been able to guide me when it gets too much. Who've able to say, okay, Sin, let's come down to the side. Let's sit. Let's talk. Let's have a relaxing. Like just have a relax. Let's just relax today. Little things like that. So I think support. Because if you put the pressure on yourself, you need to have other people that would help release that pressure and has faith in you, have people have trust in you.
That was the next question I was going to ask. How do you find that balance in your life? From the perspective of when we, if you get on a plane, that's one of the first things they say to do in an emergency. Hopefully, no one goes through that, but that's listening. But they ask you to put, they say put your mask on before helping
Mm-hmm.
others. So how do you
Mm-hmm.
find that balance to ensure? I mean, you've got people that are
Mm-hmm.
around you that are, it sounds like that they guide you from that perspective, and that
Mm-hmm.
they notice when you need to settle down a little bit. And I remember that when I was younger working in mine sites, I would work day shift and then I'd go at night. I said, can I learn different equipment and go out there
Mm-hmm.
and do that at night? But after a little bit of time, I said, hey, you need to, just have a bit of a break from that because you're getting a little bit tired.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you, I mean, if you don't have those people around, how do you regulate that yourself?
Learning the lessons those people give you.
Can you
Um,
elaborate on that?
so there's a concept that I strongly believe in is that even though someone is not physically there, then you may not be able to text them or call them, the lessons that they give you is still there.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if I'm having a stressful day, I will reflect back and think, okay, what would, because sometimes you get stuck in yourself
Yeah.
in those situations, and it's easy to happen. We're human. I look and I think, okay, if my mother was right next to me right now, what would she say?
Mm.
If
Oh,
my coach was with me right now, what would he say?
yeah.
If my brother, and you call back all these people, and even though sometimes you may be alone
Mm-hmm.
within a space, if you can think of, okay, right now I'm not alone. I have my mother, my brother, blah, 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 blah. I'm having a conversation with them.
Mm-hmm.
What would they say? How they speak to me?
Mm.
Because you know them, you would have spoken to them, you know their wisdom, their lessons. You use their memory or use their presence, even if it's just mental presence. So say, okay, I'm getting outside of myself now.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me, mum. How would you help me? Okay, da 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 da. Right? It's a way of getting outside your bubble and getting into the mindset of talking to others, even though if you're not there, even if you're in your own mind, in your own mental mindsets, you're thinking, I am with other people, I am supported, and when I can call that person, I'll call them. But for now, their memory and their lessons and their wisdom, I'm going to draw from.
Mm. It sounds very much like the mastermind that Napoleon Hill talks about in the book Think and Grow Rich, where you're creating,
Mm.
even though those people are not there, you've got you're able to have a conversation in a way with one with what they might advise you.
Mm. Exactly. I've never read that book before, but you described it quite nicely.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. But I'd have to give the credit to Napoleon Hill, who wrote the book when he did describe that. He had a mastermind where he would even, famous and intelligent people that were no longer alive, he would have conversations with them as to what they would guide in those moments. So from that side of things, when you're going through, you've gone through that process of, when you were you mentioned about, we've talked about the war side of things. You mentioned that you're in a religion that you didn't want to be part of. How did that, how did you identify that? And how did that relationship work with your parents, that when you decided that that's not where you wanted to be? So what I was saying then before we had that interruption, Sydney, for the viewers, Sydney has a really hot phone, so he's just turned the camera off to let it cool down a little bit. But what we're going to, and for the audio listeners, you don't have anything to worry about, but we'll move forward. Sydney, I just want to talk about, you mentioned there was two things that were...
Unfortunately, listen, sorry, I was gonna say, unfortunately, you won't see my face for a little bit for the people watching it on video, but
That's all right. I'll
come
put
back to it.
funny images and pretend that's you with your mouth moving. No, kidding.
Oh, that'd be hilarious. Can I have a little balloon just kind of off the side as well?
Exactly. You can be the balloon boy. But I mean, you mentioned those two things that were kind of imposed on you. One was the war, and the other one was the religion that you didn't want to be part of. What was that like from that perspective? How did you become aware that this wasn't something that was right for you? And more to the point, I mean, it sounds, from what I heard, if I heard correctly, that there was something that your parents wanted to do, and at a young age, you decided, no, I'm not going to do that. How did you have that conversation?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Very difficult. Very, very difficult. I don't know about your religious background, but I will say for my one,
I was brought up Roman Catholic. I'm Polish, Russian, and Ukraine combination. And I
okay.
facetiously say I can't be Catholic anymore because I don't feel guilt. So
Well, I come from an ethnic group called the Fulanis, who are very known to be Muslim. It's a very big Muslim ethnic group. You don't have to be Muslim, but it's just one of those things where if you're part of this ethnic group, there's a stereotype that you are Muslim. So I grew up in an ethnic group that's very based on Islamic culture. My granddad was the imam, so the head of the mosque. So my mum my mum had a very religious upbringing. Same for my father as well. And so it was very difficult having very religious parents and having a very religious household and stepping out. And I think for me, the one thing is, and this is a blessing my parents gave me, was an intellectual curious mind.
Right.
I'm someone who I'm always questioning why this, why this, why this, why this. I could agree with I can have a conversation with you about something I agree on, and I would intentionally try to disprove myself because I want to get in the reasoning. Why do I actually think this is correct?
Do you often
that kind
paddle upstream with a rowboat?
Yeah. I mean, that's more fun because I've always had the idea of, if I cannot prove, if I'm having this conversation about someone about something I believe in, if I cannot explain my convictions, but also understand the flaws in my conviction, that means I've not researched that properly.
I love that. That's awesome.
I can say I can say I believe in something, but no, it has flaws because every idea has flaws.
Yeah.
So that's why I try to disprove something myself. Because then when I'm having a conversation with someone, I can come from a position of understanding when someone says, I don't agree with you.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So doing that eventually made me realize I don't believe in the religion. And it was a long process from 12 to 17 of, oh, this doesn't sit right with me, or this doesn't sit right with me. And I just had to take the step out and say, you know what? I live and die by my virtues and by my
Mhm.
morals. And if I stay in something I don't believe in,
Mhm.
I'll be giving myself a discredit because I'm
Wow.
not giving my full self.
Yeah, I love that.
Mm.
And how did that conversation go with your parents?
The hesitation shows how well it went. um, Difficult, and I understand why it was difficult for them because having very religious parents, obviously they know how their faith has affected them.
Yeah.
So not the best, but one thing I'll say about my parents is they are understanding and they're loving. So
Mhm.
over time is got better. But the initial stages of it, like any parent who has a strong belief in something and their kids are going away from it, they were like, "Why are you doing this? This is what we believed in. This is da 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 da." It could be any ideology, but that's what they believed in very strongly. And having one of their kids say no, it is like, why? This is what I strongly believe in. I want you to believe in it. But eventually they realized I'm stubborn and I don't believe in it.
So how many siblings do you have?
um Biologically, so altogether, so my mom remarried. So step and biological, 10, 11.
Wow.
Yeah.
And are you the only one that stepped out of the religion, or did others as well?
Um, Me and my brother did.
Right. So you went alone. Who went first?
My brother.
Okay. So you kind of paved the way a little bit for you that they were able to
Yeah.
accommodate a little bit. Yeah.
You can say he gave me the courage to actually believe in my convictions because at the time I was only like a 15, 16 year old.
Mm,
It's scary. It's a very scary thing to say, hey, I don't believe in this anymore. So, but when I saw my brother make that step, it kind of gives you that conviction of, you know what, if your brother can do this, you can do this. If your role model can do this, you can do this.
so your brother was your role model as well, was he?
Oh, still is, still is.
Yeah.
I have many role models in my life, but I have pillars as well. So I kind of I distinguish pillars and role models.
Hmm.
Role models are the people who can go away for life reasons, but you still think of them.
Hmm.
Pillars are for me the people that no matter what happens in my life, I will lay my life for them. They're my pillars. So for me, it's
Wow.
my brother, and I have a cousin who I call my twin.
Mm.
So even though she's my cousin, we're twins
Yeah.
essentially.
Wow.
And for me, me and them two, they're my pillars
Mm.
in life.
Can we talk through this
Hmm.
finding of courage? Um,
Okay.
because from that perspective, as you said, I mean,
Mm.
stepping out sounds like it was, I mean, that long silence, as you highlighted, very much indicated that that wasn't an easy step. That was a very, very difficult one. And even with your brother going first, it was a difficult one for you as well. Can you
Hmm.
talk through, how you found your courage and yeah, how that worked? How do you, I mean, how that affected you as well, taking that step?
Hmm. That's a good question. Finding courage. I think courage is easy to muster when you've had to shown courage. You had to show courage, or you've had people in your life that had to show great courage.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll go back to the war.
Mm.
Um, there are many times where my family have had to show courage. There's many times where I, going back to the stars I carry, these are the people who have had to show great courage. I come from a place where I'm around very courageous people, very goal driven people, very people who know what they want and follow it,
Mm-hmm.
and have had to show courage because I go to my parents. If my mother didn't show courage during the war, I wouldn't be here right now.
Mm.
So I think half of showing courage is when you're struggling, and it's easier for me, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
because when I need to show courage, I always think, okay, what have I gone through? There's a fighter in me. There's a fighter. There's always going to be in me, and that's where the courage comes from.
Mm-hmm.
That fight, that resilience.
Mm.
And if you naturally have had to have resilience from a very young age, it makes it very easy. But I'm very aware that if you haven't come from a place of trauma, it is hard to show courage because resilience. I think there's a saying where sometimes you have to be strong, not because you want to, but because you have to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And if you, in that perspective where you've had to be strong and courageous and resilient because you have to survive, it's easy. But if it's a thing where it's a choice, or it's not a forced courage, it's not a forced resilience, it's you have to build it up. So I think, to answer your question, it's easier for me because I've come from a place where I've had to be resilient because of trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and I've had to hone it and develop it, but I've had a head start. But I think courage comes from resilience, because the more resilient you are, the more courageous you can be off of that.
Mm-hmm. Do you have to go through that pain to learn that courage, do you think?
I have to go through, to an extent.
I mean,
If we're going for
I mean, I
resilience,
raised
it's a
that.
tricky
Sorry to
one.
interject there, but I raised that because I have a business partner, and she, I'm not often shocked, but she surprised me when she said, "You learn through courage until you learn to learn," and she learned through pain until you learn to learn through joy. Um,
Ooh.
which, yeah, there was an eye opener for me as well, and I went, "Yeah, that's a good point." Yeah, I mean, and there's a whole raft of under that, but that's what I wanted to get your opinion on. From your perspective of learning this courage, do you have to learn through having this trauma, or can you actually learn to be courageous without the trauma?
I would, this is a topic I've not really thought of fully. I'll say on the spot, most learning, even if it's not personal trauma, it'd probably be historical trauma. So even the courage learned will either come from a place of historical trauma through family that you're kind of absorbing in and learning from,
Mm,
or your own personal trauma. So you're still learning from pain,
mm-hmm,
but it's either looking at other people's pain and going, my uncle has gone through this. Okay, I'm learning about, okay, this is how you do this. This is how you be more resilient when someone breaks your heart or whatever. Or I've had this heartbreak myself. So it's either through other people's pain that you're watching and observing and learning from
mm-hmm,
to be more courageous, or your own. So I'll say it does come from a bit of pain. It may not
mm.
be your own pain, but there's still an element of pain in there.
Because I wonder about that from the perspective, for example, when I look at my day, and the reality is, if you look at any day that
Hmm.
anybody has, we don't know how that's going to turn out.
Hmm.
We have no idea. And I'm sure everyone's had a day where it started out with an expectation and things have gone to hell that they didn't, um, you know, expect was going to happen. That's completely flipped on its head.
Hmm.
Anyone that's had a car accident will fall into that category. Or any, even if you trip over in the street, that can be something that can be traumatic,
Hmm.
especially if you're in a crowded group of people. That could be very embarrassing.
Hmm.
So we don't know what's going to happen, and
Hmm.
I'm wondering from that perspective, how do we have that courage to go forward? Is the case where you know, in spite of what could be fear of we not knowing what's going to happen, or is it ambivalence and just going not really thinking about it? Because I wonder about that. For me, every day with a lot of the work that I'm doing, when I'm doing something, I'm wondering, can I, because a lot of things I'm doing are sort of a little bit new and growing. It's like, can I do this? And immediately I just go, yeah, I can, and start doing it. And I was just wondering how, from your perspective, what your experience was like in that regard.
Oh, I think my experience in that is actually when you said that, the first thing that came to my mind was, have you heard of the poet Maya Angelou?
I think I know the name. It's kind of familiar, but I don't know the work.
She is, I think, personally for me, she's my poetry hero. I love her. She influenced a lot of my work.
Mm.
One of if you go on YouTube, you can find a lot of her interviews that she's done,
Mm-hmm.
just like sitting interviews. And she has this quote, and it sticks with me to this day. She says, "I am always scared," and I think I'll paraphrase it. I'm always scared, but I still do it anyway.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of thinking, her thing, and she added on to that by saying, one of the greatest freedoms I've had, and this is something I'm still processing this thoughts that she said, and how it affects me. One of the greatest freedoms I've had, and her words were, is that I will die, and accepting that I will die.
Mm.
Because when you accept that you're gonna die, and her words here is, that's a promise that you cannot take back.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna die. So what happens is, when you're scared, when you know, okay, I'm gonna die, I have to live in the present. I have to try, I have to push myself. And this is how I take this quote, and it's a quote I'm still processing myself.
Mm.
It's I have to move forward because I have no control of that, right? If being courageous may mean applying for a job interview, right? Going, you know what? If I don't do this and I die tomorrow, I that's if you die tomorrow, then that's an opportunity missed.
Mm.
So you just be in the present. If I'm gonna die tomorrow, I'm gonna apply for this job interview. See what happens. I cannot control tomorrow. I cannot control the past. I control right now. But it's a very interesting quote. I'm from piggybacking what you're saying, that I'm still thinking as well, and it helps with courage, and that's her view of courage. But I'll say my own personal view would be, coming back to my athletic background. As
Mm-hmm.
an athlete, you're used to pushing your body even though you're scared. I would say I started off as a 400-meter runner. And especially in 400 meters, you do the worst sessions, unmanageable.
Now you're bringing up
Like,
trauma from my childhood.
yes, we can understand, like, it's, but knowing you have to go to training and you're gonna put your body in so much pain, and
Mm.
you're gonna suck and it's gonna hurt, and you have that fear. And I remember even to this day, when I'm training in winter training and I know it's going to be hard, you have that fear within you. Am I going to do this? Can I do this? But you chase the feeling after.
Mm-hmm.
You go, I'm scared now, but I know when I finish this session, I'm going to be a stronger person.
See, that's a different reframe. And that's why I wanted to explore that, because the question I have is around that fear. Is that
Mm,
fear a result of our expectations, and a reframe on our expectations changes that? Whereas, I mean, you mentioned about before going for a job interview, fearing the job interview, the fear from the job interview, if you're there going with the expectation that, well, obviously you're going to get it, that it, you're
mm,
looking to get it, you're hoping to get it, that's an expectation.
mm,
Now, there's obviously a very real prospect, because you have no idea who else is, well, maybe you've
mm,
got secret spies everywhere and you've worked out who
mm,
else is applying it, but in most cases, you don't know who else is applying, you don't know what their skill level is, you don't really know what the company's looking for. So you're walking into a massive unknown. Whereas if you go with the expectation of saying, well, one outcome is that I want to get this job. Another outcome is that I want to be better at doing interviews.
perfect. Yeah. Yeah, and
From
I
that,
agree with that.
yeah, so that's what I was wondering from that side of things. Do we, with courage, and you mentioned about the fear of dying, and part of that is, we exist, so we, in this form anyway. I'm not going to get into all the other
Yeah.
possibilities that be here forever. But from that perspective, we don't know with certainty what's going to happen. You can have
Mm.
faith, but there's no proof. So from that perspective, it's that unknown of what's going in. So is part of that courage accepting that there is an element of unknown, because you don't, again, coming back to that original point, you don't know what's going to happen by the end of the day. Is it
Exactly. Yeah.
having that reframe, and as the poet said, you act anyway.
I think it's a mixture of that. I think that reframe is very important, because if you reframe it from a hard goal to an open-ended goal, I think the open-ended goal being, I'm going to be a better person.
Mm.
And I think it's very hard for people to do something and knowing I'm going to be a better person. Especially, I think as an athlete, I struggled with that, because in sports, there's a very clear end goal of how you're going to be a better person.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I am training to be a swimmer, and I'm training and I'm going to swimming training,
Mm-hmm.
I know the success is I'm going to be a better swimmer. I don't know how yet, but I know my time in swimming is going to go down. In life is a lot more trickier. I don't know, and I still carry that athlete mentality onto my real life, but into outside life. But you don't know what the success is. Like with our job interview, to keep the same example, you don't know how that job interview is going to make you a better person.
Mm.
It could mean you've made a new network that when you get that job in that area, in the industry, oh, now you can contact that person who
Mm.
interviewed you. It could mean you get the job.
Mm-hmm.
It could mean you meet someone in the interview room, like the waiting room. That's the person you link with. You don't know in life what the success is, but if you go with it going, you know what, I'm gonna be a better person from this by
Mm.
doing it. I don't know how, which is the scary part, but I know I'm gonna be a better person. And I'll be honest, I struggle with that as well, because from an athlete's standpoint, you know how you're gonna get better. From a life standpoint, you don't, but still carrying the same thing over, but just the unknown of how you're gonna get better can be daunting. But if you accept you don't know how, but you know you're gonna get better, it makes it better. It makes it exciting.
Is that part of when we look at that component, as you said, how, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to question that,
Yeah.
because we always see, and I always giggle when I see them, you see those memes, so to speak, and they have two roads, and it says, here's the plan, and the top one has the plan, and it's this nice smooth road, and then the bottom one is, this is the what happened, and there's trenches and all these obstacles that had to overcome. And I wonder from that perspective, are we also when we start out with something, and obviously optimism bias is a good thing when you're starting, because if you knew the reality, and in a lot of cases, maybe you wouldn't start, and wouldn't have all that growth opportunity. But from that perspective, is that something as well which can create a different mindset when we're starting things, is going, hey, this expectation that I have, when there's a bit of optimism bias here, and just having an expectation, I call it beginners suck. Whenever you start something new, you're not going to be great at it. That's just life. And remembering and putting it in context, and people do this research. I have no idea who does it, but they do. Apparently they studied babies learning to walk. And when a baby was learning to walk, on average, they tried and failed 8,000 times. That's massive when you think about it. Especially when you think about it as an adult, when you try something new. So who says adults don't learn faster? Because I think most things that we try, we're not approaching 8,000 times to do it to get there. But is that part of that reframe as well? Is accepting, hey, I'm not going to be great at this at the start. That's part of that process.
And you said that quite nice. I think my psychological background coming in now, from a child development perspective, a baby or a young child is in a very unique situation where they have to learn to walk and talk. And
well, they don't have to, but
as in
they
not
wouldn't
have to,
fit in
but
very well.
they won't. Yeah, exactly. It's a situation where
it's kind of like extreme peer pressure, isn't it? Everyone else is doing it.
And they don't know any different. Like when they're learning, it's something that they know. I must learn to walk because a child is learning the physical the physical strength. They're going, cool, I can do this, I can walk, I can do. When we're adults, I think the tricky thing is we have knowledge, we have wisdom, we have history to call back on. A baby doesn't. A baby just knows.
Is it real history though? Because I love what you just said then about they don't know any different. Now, from our perspective, when we try and don't succeed at something, is that reality or is it a perceived reality that we've created?
That's it. The psychologist in me goes, we don't know. And I know it's the worst answer possible. It's the worst answer
but
possible.
Psychologists, you're not giving any definitive answers. You're asking and going, what do you think? That's why the English test works. It reminds me of
that's really tricky though.
Isn't it? The psychologist, it's like he put up the ink block and the person says, oh, that looks like sex, and holds up another one that looks like sex, that one. And they're all about sex. And then says, yeah, I can see your problem. You've got a sex addiction. And the guy says, well, you're the one with the dirty pictures. So
that's why it's really tricky because like, when it comes to especially well-being, it's so tricky because it depends on how you think. I always describe like my old professor used to say psychology, especially and mental health, is really hard because everyone thinks differently. You have some people who will think in a very social psychological way, which is society frames how I think, so therefore if I change the environment I'm in, my frame will change. You have some people who are very, very biological in their way of thinking. And they go, oh, I'm here. This is because of hormones. So if I do this and do this and do this, I'll change my hormones. So when you go back to the whole thing of where does the reality come from, it's really tricky because it depends on the person. How does the person think? How does the person operate? Because we're all different people. If me being a very socio-cognitive person, I think society and how we process the information from society affects how we see our history. So, for example, two people can get the same stimulus and the same information. How I process it is going to be different from you. And I think the processing is what makes something reality or not. You may see different details. Let's say we can both be looking at the bike. I will process the bike differently by going, oh, I want to become a bike racer. That's how I'm processing it. And I might go, oh, okay, maybe this is made out of steel and da da da. You may be thinking, all bikes are very scary. Oh, I'm gonna not do. It's the processing is different. The bike is still the bike.
Yeah, well, that's what I love that perspective. I draw from Shakespeare in Hamlet, where it said, "Nothing is good or bad; thinking makes it so." And because I have a thing where I don't, positive and negative doesn't exist. Even if you look at a battery, it just shows which way the electrons are going to flow. Because once you put it into a loop, it is a loop. It's actually not.
And I agree with you.
Yeah. So it's an interesting dynamic. So when we're looking at that side of things, and again, coming back to that reframe of beginners suck and you don't know any different, is that where, from that perspective and the courage component here? is opening up and saying, hey, this is how I approach this is going to affect how I'm going to deal with that. But I have the choice
Yes,
as
I
to
would agree with that.
how I think about it.
I would agree with that for sure. How you approach it is massive. Um,
Mm,
I think there's some studies that there's studies done on anxiety and
mm,
phobias, and sometimes the only difference is if you process that thing as dangerous, it becomes more dangerous because your brain is going, oh, like snakes, for example. You
mm,
may go, oh, that snake's gonna bite me, and if it's gonna bite me, and oh, I'm gonna run. If it bites me, then I'm gonna go to hospital, and then your brain is all on this whole journey of I could die
mm.
from a snake.
Yeah.
But then you have some people, which I'm not gonna lie, I hate snakes. They terrify me personally. But you have some people that see a snake and go, "Oh, what's a beautiful, majestic creature!
Mm,
Look at its scales. Look at the this," and then they don't have the phobia. They're still wary of it. They go, "Oh, but it's poisonous." But
mm,
they go, "But it's such a beautiful creature. Look how it behaves.
mm,
If it comes towards me, I'm gonna calmly back up so it doesn't see me as a I don't it doesn't see me as a threat, but I'm not gonna run away thinking I'm gonna die."
yeah.
And I think that's where the courage comes from. Where going back to the courage, if you see a situation going back to a job interview
Mm,
and you're framing it as, "Oh, I have to get this job. If I don't, I'm a failure." Oh, you're framing it from a very negative standpoint. So you put that pressure on yourself.
mm,
And that pressure can make it harder for you to be courageous because you go, "Oh, I'm not going to do it because I'm going to fail." Easy done. It's easier to have that mindset. But if you go in with, "I'm going to give it my all, whatever happens, happens," I'm either going to make, like going back to the success criteria, I'm either going to learn how to do a better interview, or I'm going to learn about interview questions that I would not have expected,
mm,
or I'm going to make a new friend, or whatever it may be that you can, if you see there's always going to be a positive in the situation,
mm,
that helps reframe it because it may not end how you want it to,
mm.
but you can still say, "Oh, but here's the positives and here's how I'm going to move forward."
And is that something when you look again at the peer group that you have around you, and I'll put this into a
Mm,
different context as well.
okay.
A little while ago, I had an employee who was a really, really good employee, and
Mm,
they started not being so good and
mm,
started getting worse. And I kept thinking, I'm going to fire this person.
mm,
They're not performing anymore, but I didn't want to because I knew they were really, really good. But
mm,
in discussions with them, nothing came out. They didn't say what was going on or anything like that. But then eventually something came up and they did. And they said that they were feeling depression. And I said, okay, right
mm,
here, this is now your job description. Um, before you do any other work, and this is before you even come to work, when you wake up in the morning, you're to write out 5 things you're grateful for, do 10 box breaths, which is for those not sure, breathe in, hold, breathe out, hold,
mm,
and read 10 pages of an inspirational book. That is your job description. Within 2 weeks,
mm.
that person completely changed and went back to it was actually better than what they originally were. And I know it's not the same for everybody. You mentioned that before, but when you look at the peer group that you have and the support that you have, how much do you think that is helping with your mindset of saying, being focused on those things that are of benefit to you?
Mm. First, I would say that's your example there was useful because I think having a boss that does that is very useful because it comes from a place of compassion to do so, and not everyone has that compassion to give advice like that to an employee. So that's amazing.
I don't know if it's
And
compassion
from
or economic because it's always more expensive to find a new employee than it is to develop one that's really good. So maybe there's a
I
bit of
think
compassion there,
both.
but there's
I
certainly an
think,
economic component too.
and I'd say for me, recently, and this is a recent thing for me, I've recently moved up north in the
Mhm.
last 6 months. So I went from having a very
So in Australia,
secure
you've kind
group.
of gone a couple of kilometers, but really, sorry.
Yeah, I think for reference, I moved 120 miles. I
Yeah,
don't know how that will relate to Australia,
you're still in
but
Victoria. You haven't moved to
yeah,
state
wow.
yet.
So I came from a place of having a very secure group of people,
Hmm.
a very secure network, and moving to somewhere I have to rebuild.
Mm.
And context for me as a person, I'm someone who there's a saying with my ethnic group, which is we're travelers. The
Mm.
Fulanis are travelers.
Yeah.
We have a very, we don't like staying in
TARDIS?
one.
Sorry, you're from UK.
Oh, I'm a massive Doctor Who fan. I got the
Oh, we're gonna
reference.
chat after this.
Um, I'll I have a picture of the Gallifreyan alphabet on my in my room.
Oh,
Like it's
really?
yes.
Love it. Oh,
So
we're
yeah.
getting into super nerd territory. This is awesome.
So I was gonna say, like, I love to travel. I love to be in different countries and in different environments. So I went from, and it's a thing I'm noticing with my mental health. I chose to be in a place where I don't have the social net, the support network I had before. So I am struggling a bit more with my mental health because I'm building that social group again around me.
Mhm.
But it's kind of a balance of I'm not removing them. They're still a phone call away for how
Mhm.
connected we are, but they're not close.
Yeah.
It's knowing, okay, what do I need now to progress in my life?
Mhm.
And what do I need to sacrifice temporarily to get to that place?
Mm.
So going back to me about the support group, I said, I'm gonna sacrifice the support group that I have
Mhm.
and build a new one
Mhm.
around me, or like talking coffee distance away, like grabbing a coffee distance around me. Because I know what I need to do right now is I need to work on being more social, especially as an
Mhm.
author. You need to be more social, and being in a small city like Cambridge, where I lived, it's hard to be social because you just get used to the little bubble. I think it's a equivalent of a small town in
As an
like
author, do you
village.
find that you think your key personality is an introvert or an extrovert?
Oh yes, introverts,
Yeah.
100%. So that's why I knew I need to get out
Mhm.
of that bubble and be courageous
Mhm.
and take that leap in the dark and be in a city where it will make me a better writer, but also it'll put me in situations where I need to be resilient in
That's-
building a new friendship group, in trusting new people, in progressing my own goals
Mhm.
whilst trusting that I know I'm going to be okay and trusting the strategies and the mental health strategies are going to be good.
So as an introvert, how do you take that step out? Because a lot of people, and it's a common thing, people have difficulty meeting other people. But from my experience, most people are friendly anyway. So how did you overcome that hurdle?
I would reframe that question. How am I overcoming it now?
Fair enough. Your interview, you
Just
can do what you
because
want.
it's because and I think
I,
just I mean because when you say a lot of people say that to me, how do I overcome it? I come off as very confident, but I'm constantly overcoming that fear, that
mm,
introversion. It's because for me, if I had my perfect day is sitting down, watching Doctor Who or reading a philosophy book. Like that for me is my perfect day. No one else around me, but it's that realization of knowing I need to, especially as a poet. And I think I'm going to say as a poet, the poetry field is very filled with extroverts.
really?
So a lot of poets are extroverts. So to be a poet, especially be a performing poet, which
Hmm.
I'm getting into, you have to have that extroversion there. So
Ah, yeah.
it's putting yourself in a position where I need to grow,
Mm,
and to grow, I need to not be introverted, even if it's just for an hour or
Mm-hmm.
2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I have a performance next Tuesday for a festival.
Mm-hmm.
I know I need to be extroverted for those 2, 3 hours. I'm going to be extroverted and I'm going to I'm going to get courageous. I'm going to show people who I am. When I get home, I'm going to sit down, have my pajamas on, read a book.
I love it.
So, yeah, that's the tricky thing. It's knowing I need to be extroverted for a little bit and then I can go back to that comfort zone, going back to what I feel comfortable with, but stepping out when you know you need to.
Is it the balance though, from that perspective? Because I mean, I relate to that myself, and I don't know if I'm an introvert or extrovert. I've kind of been both, but I love that time where I'm just left alone to, do my thing. And I kind of like being out with people as well, but I enjoy that. I have, here I record these down here at the beach house, and I've got this massive lawn, and I got rid of the gardener, and I bought an electric self-propelled lawnmower, not one you ride on, but walk behind. And I do what I call gumping. I'm Forrest Gump going up and down the lawn, and I really enjoy that. Do people, especially when people think about that, do we get again a misperception that that's okay, that we don't need to be this person that's always out there extroverting with other people?
100%. I think you need that balance. Even the most extroverted of people need to be by themselves to think.
Mm,
I think there's a psychological concept. Different countries say different things, but the idea is I'm going to say how my father says it. Everybody, like, socializing is like apples. Everyone has apples.
mhm,
Apples are your energy to
mhm,
socialize. So let's say you wake up, you had a good day's sleep, you have 10 apples.
mhm,
Some people don't, if you're very introverted, you don't have a lot of apples to spare. You don't have a lot of social energy to spare. So let's say you only have 2 apples.
mhm,
If you're a very introverted person. So you say, okay, I'm going to spend my 2 apples being around my group of friends, and that's it. That's all the energy I have.
yeah,
And then I just come back home, recharge my apples, get more apples.
yeah,
And then within that, you have people that give you apples. So you all have those friends who are like, you're around them, they give you energy, they give you confidence. And I find, as an introvert, I wake up with 2, 3 apples,
mhm,
and I surround myself with people that give me more apples
mm,
to be extroverted. So I may have 3 apples of energy to socialize, but if I know I'm going to have to perform in a big stadium or whatever, I'm going to surround myself with people who are going to give me 50 more apples of
mm,
social energy, of, and when I'm around them, I'm like very confident, very extroverted. I have all these 50 apples, I use them, I get back home and I recharge my 3. So
right,
I know I have 3, but it's having people around you who are going to give you energy and get you out of that shell and
mm,
make you feel comfortable out of that shell.
yeah. I love that. That's awesome. And I'm feeling pretty good too, because I planted an apple tree in the backyard not too long ago. So a couple of years I'll have plenty of apples. This is going to be awesome.
Lovely. Yeah.
Got a mandarin and
Yeah.
an orange tree that I planted, and a lime tree that I planted as well. I already got a lemon tree. Um,
Yeah. I think that's a very good, like, that model, like that cycles model really helps me personally.
yeah, I love
Some
it.
people say apples, some people say bananas, some people say whatever you may call it, but it's
Yeah.
just the principle of you only have certain amount of energy. Some people give you energy, some people drain your energy, and that's just, yeah.
Is that, I wonder about the energy component of that, because, and this is where for me making that shift to, um, again, from Hamlet, nothing's good, bad thinking makes it so. I
Mm,
mean, every day I have is an awesome day. I wake up
mm,
feeling awesome. I go to bed feeling awesome. Things happen that sometimes don't go to plan, but that's pretty awesome because I learn from it.
mm,
And that's an unconscious shift that I have. Well,
mm.
I've made anyway, because I didn't always think that way. And as a result, I mean, I physically sometimes get tired, but I mean, my day yesterday started with doing a whole bunch of work in the garden, did tremendous amount of stuff. And I think I went to bed about 1:30ish, and then I had to get up at 7:30 to have an interview with you.
Mm,
And I'm feeling great.
mm,
And there'll be times where I notice where I do need to have a little bit of rest, so I'll slow down a little bit physically, but mentally, I don't
mm.
feel the mental drain. Is that, and I'm just wondering, is that a way that we can think? Is it, and I don't know if that fits with popular psychology, but is it
Hmm.
possible? Am I just a freak from Gallifrey?
No, no.
I don't have
I
two
think,
hearts.
I think you come from a place of passion. I notice people who are very passionate about something have that mindset of it's been a really good day. Mentally, everything's really good because you're passionate and you love what you're doing.
Mm,
Um, I think my struggle that I'm not it's not a personal struggle. Is I live off of passion as well. If I do something, I'm doing it because I'm passionate about that thing.
mm,
I think a lot of people do things they're not passionate about.
mm,
They don't love doing it. They wake up doing something that they're doing it to survive, but they don't have a love for it.
yeah,
And I think that makes it a lot harder because if you don't have that love for it, mentally you're like, oh, I'm here again.
yeah.
Oh, I'm in this workplace. Oh, I'm in the office. You're mentally being drained because you don't have that love of it.
I don't think I had
So
that
I think what
security aspect when I was young, because whenever I was in one of those jobs, I just went there, I'm quitting, and did something else. Um, that's what I can remember my tax file number off by heart because I had that many jobs. Um, but yeah, you're right. If you don't have that passion, how do you find it?
I don't know. I would say my generation being the Instagram generation, being the
Mm,
I think gig economy
mhm,
generation, when you have a lot of jobs, it's easier
mm,
because you can have let's say a 30-hour job that you don't
mm,
like, but this is a generation where you can have more than one job. So
mm,
in your day, you can say, I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna do my streaming job, whatever, right? It could be
mm,
anything. And that's the job you love. So you
mm,
still have something in your day that's giving you that passion,
mm,
even though that main 30-hour job may not be giving that passion. But I'm gonna go home, I'm gonna edit this video for YouTube. It's been a good day.
mhm,
So I think it's easier now with, you can say, pros and cons. There's a lot more pressure, a lot more things you can do, but it's easier now that you can feasibly have two jobs.
mhm,
You can come home and do something else and have income off of it and have fun with it.
mhm. That's a different component. I mean, that element of having fun, because, and I'm going to quote Mary Poppins here, who, well, Snow White, if you want to, where
Mm-hmm.
they're cleaning the house with the animals and she's singing Whistle While You Work. And Mary Poppins said, in every job that must be done, there's an element of fun. Find the fun
Mm-hmm.
in job's a game. Now, there's a number of jobs I did that, technically sucked and were boring as batshit. But I found ways of making it a game and making it fun. Did I want to do that forever? No. I mean, I did a job once where I was packing bolts into boxes. And I could not understand a guy that had been doing that for 30 years. But while I was doing it, I can't remember how I made it fun, but I did make it fun. I had, and I couldn't understand the grumpiness of the other people. It's like, well, this can be fun. Is there that component as well, where it's a part of that mindset? Because we know that as soon as you start, I mean, I don't think they knew back then, but certainly now, when I say back then, back when they made those movies, um,
Mm-hmm.
that you just have a happy thought and your body starts producing dopamine and serotonin.
Mm-hmm. I
Is
think it's easier when from my perspective, because I working with kids, so the one time where I was a play worker, I worked in a primary school,
Mm-hmm.
and I noticed something from working with teenagers to primary school to babies to toddlers. The younger the kid is, the more positive bias they have.
Mm.
I've noticed.
Yeah.
And then the older we
Interesting.
get, the more negative bias we have. So you can
Yeah.
have two kids. You can have a 18-year-old doing a job that is, I say, conventionally boring.
Yeah.
And then you can have a 4-year-old doing something that's conventionally boring. The same task. But
Mm.
that 4-year-old is going to go, oh, how many things, like let's say sticking stickers on a paper, right?
Yeah.
It can be anything. That 4-year-old is going to go, how many can I stick in one time? That 4-year-old has a positive bias of, this is really fun because the colors are like this, or da, 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 da. It's a positive bias. Whilst an 18-year-old is going, oh, I want to be with my friends. I want to do this. This sucks.
Um,
So I don't, and this is why I don't know the studies for it really, but my personal observation, the younger we are, the more positive bias. So for my job working life, I go, let's think like a child.
mm.
Let's think like a child.
I love that.
This thing I'm this thing I'm doing right now seems really boring, but
Mm.
how would a 4-year-old think of this? Like stockings,
That's why
like
I have a
climbing up a
massive Lego
ladder.
collection.
Yeah. Even stuff like, let's say, climbing up a ladder and stocking shelves. A
Mm.
4-year-old would be like, oh, I'm climbing up a ladder and it's really fun. Look how high this is.
Yeah.
Like, why not think of it like that? Like, so that's how I think of it. Like, if I'm
Well,
doing
that's what
something
I wonder.
boring,
Is it really that simple as that mental attitude? And I personally think life is simple and easy. And I used
yeah,
to think I was alone until I found Confucius quote that said life is very simple. We just insist on complicating it.
I would agree it's simple. It is simple, but
Mm.
it's hard to make it, it's easy to make life complicated.
I love that reframe. That was pretty. You caught yourself
It's
there.
so, it's very easy to make life complicated, and we all
But
do.
it's not a requirement to make it complicated.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah,
It's not a requirement of what we do.
I love that. I love that. I'm gonna use that, but give you credit for that. It's like easy to
Thank
make
you,
life
thank you.
complicated. That's awesome. um, you mentioned children. Let's move into that space. Why
Okay.
why work with children? What was the basis for wanting to do that?
My life philosophy has always been, my life philosophy has always been, I want to pave a future that I never had, a childhood that I never had.
Ooh,
Because
wow.
I'm very aware from the age of 0 to 16, I've felt very much trapped. I
Oh.
felt like I did not belong. I had depression, and one time
Mm,
where my mental health was so bad, I thought of suicide multiple times.
mm,
Um, so for me, being an adult, I think, how can I give someone the life and the childhood I never had? So when I work with, and this is why I don't, especially in the UK, it's very easy to specialize into one age group.
mhm,
People that work with teenagers, people that work with babies. I worked with all of them because I know I want to give every age group the opportunity to thrive.
mm,
So when I work with a teenager, I'm
mhm,
very fortunate. There's some teenagers now that I've worked with who are in university, and I can see how they've grown through sometimes my mistakes,
mhm,
sometimes my wisdom, and sometimes my example.
mm,
And for me, if a child or teenager can see me in 30, 40 years' time, because I
mm,
always think a child is not a child is a future adult.
mhm,
That baby who's only 1 month old is a
mm.
future adult.
Yeah.
I don't think of you as a 1 month old child,
Mhm,
because eventually in 30 years you're going to be an adult. So what am I doing right now
mm,
to give you the best chance in adulthood.
Wow.
That 7-year-old, what am I doing right now to give you best chance in adulthood?
Mm.
That teenager, with my mentality and how I think of youth work, it means I can work with every age group and my message can still go through. It still works. I'm not thinking you're a toddler. What does a toddler need? I think what do you need? Because again, every child is different, everyone's different.
Mm-hmm.
What do you need to be a better adult? So me working with kids is going, in 30 years' time, I have the privilege of knowing I can meet some of the athletes that I've worked with, some of the kids I've worked with in primary and secondary school,
Mm-hmm.
and say, I've done good. You
Mm.
now have life, you now have a wife and kids. You now, in fact, two of the athletes I've coached are dating
Mm.
because I helped create an environment where they felt comfortable being open around each other.
Mm-hmm.
And these are little things I'm like, wow, I've had an impact on their adult life.
Yeah.
That for me is why I work with kids. I'm giving them a childhood that I never had.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't want a child to feel like they're unsafe physically or mentally. I want them to thrive.
Yeah. And how do you do that with the children? What ways? How do you facilitate that?
Depends what age group would you like me to specify on?
Yeah. Well, I was just because I didn't have a lot of background as to
Ah,
how how you actually work with children generally.
okay. So just a brief summary of my career then. So I started as a play worker. So I was a play worker
Mm-hmm.
between for primary age kids.
Mm-hmm.
Then whilst I was a play worker, I was an athletics coach.
Mm-hmm.
So I injured athletes' life. You get injured. So I got into coaching when I was injured.
Mm-hmm.
And I would coach teenagers up to 20, 22, 23, adult. Like I was coaching from 11 to 25.
Yeah.
So I was working as a play worker for primary school kids and a coach for secondary school kids simultaneously. And then I also worked in a primary school, in a secondary school as a teaching assistant as well when I graduated. So I kept both avenues open as a play worker, as a teaching assistant, as a coach, and now transitioning careers. I'm looking to fully go into the writing world now, but
Mm.
my transitional job now is as a nursery, working in nursery. So I wanted to go into the baby and toddler end.
Oh, wow.
But I've never had that. I don't have that experience yet with babies and toddlers. So I
Mm.
thought, okay, I know how it's like in primary school.
Mm-hmm.
I know how it's like in secondary. I know how it's like in college. In fact, I was training to be a secondary school teacher. So I know how it's like that. Let
Mm-hmm.
me see how it's like in toddlers and babies. So I found through my life wisdom, the younger the child, the more hand holding you have to give
Mm-hmm.
because the younger the child, they are going to do certain things because they don't know better.
Yeah.
They think it's an egocentric way of thinking. It's very me, but it's very important because they're developing their sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
How do I fit in this world? What do I want? I want this, I want this. So
Mm-hmm.
when a young toddler or a young kid in primary school is being very selfish, that's very obviously as an adult we need to modulate it so they don't become a narcissist.
Mm.
But it means they're discovering what they want and their values,
Yeah.
which is very important as an adult. But we need to give the structure of going, okay, that's good, but let's not push the boundaries. That's don't be disrespectful to this person, or we need to share. That's where you set the boundaries. The older the kid, So let's say now a teenager, 14, 15, 16, they know the boundaries already.
Mm-hmm.
They know how to treat people right or wrong.
Mm.
They know how to be a good human being to others.
Mm.
It's given them the opportunity to.
I love
And
that.
that's where as adults is very tricky for us, because we, especially like 13, 14, 15, 16, it's very easy just to protect them and say, nope, you're under my circle, you can't do this, you can't do this. But let's say a 16-year-old is saying, I trust you to go out with your friends, knowing I have shown you how to behave responsibly.
Mm.
I trust that you will do the right thing. And if you don't do the right thing, we can come back and talk about it and learn from it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point in parenthood, which is a whole different topic. Being able to
And it's hard.
so yeah,
And it's a hard thing to do.
mm,
And not just parents. I think anyone who works with young people find it hard. Because
that's a good point.
I've noticed that certain teachers would restrict students from doing certain things because they think it's too dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, have a conversation with that kid, with, let's say, the teenager. Have a conversation with that teenager. Do
Mm,
they know the rights and wrongs? Can
yeah.
you guide them through it? Because at the end of the day, they're going to be future adults.
Mm-hmm.
It will be useful for them to learn and explore the world around them.
Mm,
So if we as adults are restricting them from exploring, and this is a quote the athlete of mine told me personally,
mm-hmm.
they said, one of the hardest things about being a teenager, 14, 15, 16, 13, is you feel restricted. People remind you how young you are, but remind you of how responsible you should be.
You're caught in the middle.
Yeah. So instead of going, oh, you're responsible, explore,
Mm-hmm.
and come back to me, and we'll still have the guidelines, we'll still have the framework of this is right, this is wrong.
Mm,
I'm going to guide you through life
mm-hmm.
instead of pushing you through life.
Part of that too is also having the ability to let go and let them decide. I mean, I have a 14-year-old son, and I even gave it to him and said, "What grades do you want to get at school?" And he chose.
Mm.
Which for
Mm-hmm.
me, as a parent, you're always thinking you want to aim higher, but
Mm.
particularly when I was at school, when I was younger, I was a straight A student, so I'm like going, thinking, yeah. So, but you've got to be careful what you say. But I love that work that you're doing. We've talked for a while, and I could talk forever on this. This would be awesome. So maybe we can have another catch up at some point and,
Oh,
and
definitely, yeah.
continue the discussion. Yeah. But to wind up, if you were to give the audience, a key takeaway, wisdoms, nutshell, what would you want them to take away from this interview?
I would say, well, that's a big question. Because there's a lot of things I would want, but I would say, ooh, you know what? Life, I'm kind of like, well, going back to what I said before, life is very simple, but we make it hard.
Mm,
And it's easy to make it hard. And when we're making life hard for ourselves, we shouldn't beat ourselves up
mm-hmm,
and going, oh, I'm making myself life again. I'm making life hard again.
mm,
It's accepting that it's easy to make life hard and going, I slipped up. That's okay. I'm human. And
mm,
saying, you know what? Now let me do the hard thing and make life easy for me.
yeah.
Let me not do, it's kind of counterproductive going, let me actually do the thing that's more difficult and just relax and unburden myself.
Mm.
Because life is easy to make hard. Let's do the opposite and actually make it easy for ourselves.
I love that. That's awesome. Sydney, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you. There's so much exciting material that you've covered, so much depth of knowledge there too. So I really appreciate you opening up and sharing some of the detail of your life as well. And I'm sure
Thank you very much.
has really got a lot out of it. So thank you for taking that time.
Hmm. Thank you very much. And I mean, for any of the listeners, especially as an author, a lot of my books on Amazon and my links there. So a lot of as a poet, I give myself a lot of the things I believe in go in my work. So if you want to see more of me, then my books and things like that. Yeah.
Fantastic. And we will include those in the show notes as well. We've got all those details there. So thank you very much again, Sydney. Pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes for others and for you.